we're going to bring up our next group, which is going to be talking about maximizing the use of GAP funds for your tribe. This is going to be Todd Mitchell, Catherine Brown, Lucas DeSablon, and Christy Fry. And the speakers will be introducing themselves. So do we have Todd, Catherine, Lucas, and Christy in the room? Come on up on stage.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. We're excited to talk about a topic that should be high on everybody's minds. We're going to talk about some administrative efficiencies for tribes with GAP programs and a few additional opportunities you might have and you may not have heard of before or you may not be aware of. So we're excited to do that. Up first, I'm going to bring up my colleague, Catherine Brown.
Thanks so much, Christy. Hey, did some of us not make it back from lunch? We look like we have. So some of us are missing, but that's okay. I'm Catherine. I'm with EPA Region 10's Tribal Program out of the Seattle office. And I know most of you that made it back from lunch, so good to see you here. So I only have a couple of minutes and I want to try to make the most out of them. So I'm planning on some speed Q&A. Can you guys help me out with some speed questions and answers and just raise your hand to answer? Yeah? Okay, or you can clap either way or just shout out. How many of us work with GAP funding somehow, one way or another? Okay, you're in the right room. You made it back to the right place. How many of us work for a tribe directly? Excellent. How many for federal or state programs? Okay, we got a few of us in here. How many of us work in a big environmental department with lots of programs? All right. How many of us work in a very small environmental office where 1 or 2 people, 1 or 2 grants? All right, we got a good diversity in this crowd. How many of us feel like we have enough funding? Okay, trick question. How many of us feel like we have enough time in the day? Okay, how many of us have it all together? We know it. I knew it. That man right there, Stacy Murphy, he is the one to see. Okay, well, how many of us love paperwork? I heard somebody earlier mention that they loved graphs. Where is that person? Is she with us? There was a graph lover. My dad used to give me graphs for Christmas. I don't love graphs, but this is some of the paperwork that we deal with. And how many of us here do our own paperwork? Have to write our own grant proposals, our own reports? Okay, how many of us have staff that do that for us? Come on, raise your hand. I see you. Lucky people right there. All right. Well, next slide here. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, let's go for it. How many of us can identify with this picture on the left? Dumpster fire. I believe, how many of us packed this way? Stood on top of their suitcases. Okay, it's all me. How many of you packed very neatly in these little boxes? Perfect. You guys are ready to work on grant proposals and reports with us. How many like this duck that this woman decided the duck stops here? I do. How many of you know your EPA tribal coordinator? All right. How many EPA tribal coordinators do we have in the room? Okay. Well, as Casey mentioned earlier, tribal coordinators work as liaisons between tribes and the agency, and we are here to try to help navigate the bureaucracy and how to figure out this paperwork as best and as efficiently as we can so that you all can get back to the important work of building and developing your programs and working on your projects. So we have a few examples of things that if you reach out to your tribal environmental coordinator at EPA, we may be able to help do to reduce some of the administrative burdens. So I encourage you to reach out and get in touch with your TC. And I think that we all recognize that there are some really, really big issues that we're working on here, and some that have been generations in the making. And we can't do it all, and we can't do it alone. So I hope, how many of us are working with other departments within our agency or within our tribes? Great. How many are working with other tribes or intertribal consortia? Excellent. How many are working with schools? How about cities or states? Great partnerships. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for being here. And this is a great opportunity to meet some of your colleagues at the state and the federal levels and the other tribes. And we have a couple other tools that my friends, Christy and, oh, do I? Dang. Oh, yes, I do. How many of us identify with the picture on the left with the Post-it notes? Who does this? All right. Who's got the neat desks? Ray. Of course you do. All right. How many of us would rather be doing a beach cleanup or a dam removal? Yeah. All right. All about administrative efficiency. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Catherine. So today, we've been talking a lot about collaboration, and there are some tools for collaboration for administrative efficiencies when it comes to GAP grants. How many of you knew that in the most recent GAP guidance, the 2022 guidance, how many of you knew that there was the opportunity for tribes to apply for GAP through a consortium? So having a consortium apply on their behalf. Sweet. I see some hands. That means we did a good job of talking about that. This allows tribes who maybe have a lack of administrative support for many different reasons to apply using a consortia to assist them with that. How many of you have heard of tribes working together administratively? Has anybody in the audience heard of this before? So yeah, I actually work with a couple of tribes who support each other. So I have a tribe that I work with that has their offices in Anchorage, and they have a presence in their traditional village, but the neighboring tribe is also living in that traditional village, and they lacked the administrative support from the village site, particularly because of lack of internet, but for many other reasons. And so they started working together with another tribe under an MOU in order to support their work. This has co-benefits because both tribes in the community then are receiving GAP grants. And so that money is going and being put together to work on some of their joint concerns environmentally. And so this is something that I don't think many tribes know that is an opportunity, but there is absolutely, with your tribal council's approval, there's absolutely precedence for this. So something to think about. If you maybe are seeing a neighboring tribe struggle administratively, maybe reach out and see if if you can't come to some sort of agreement. The third piece that I will talk about is tribes forming a consortia for projects. Now, forming a consortia can sound really scary, right? That's a lot of paperwork. When I say this, I'm not saying necessarily that you have to go through the process of forming a formal consortium, but many times we've had tribes come in with applications for specific projects working together. And so we have seen both formal and informal consortia formed for the purpose of applying for funding. Most recently, some communities I work with on the Lower Yukon got together to apply for some solid waste funding, and they were able to do a larger scale backhaul project because they worked together and they were able to bring in a contractor to do that work. So I just really wanted to highlight that collaboration is a big opportunity for for tribes who maybe have struggled administratively. And so up next, my colleague Lucas is going to talk a little bit about performance partnership grants.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. For those that I have not met, my name is Lucas Dusablin, and I am a tribal coordinator that works really closely with Catherine and Christy and everyone else in the tribal team. And I'm going to talk a little bit about performance partnership grants, or PPGs. Big button in the middle. Not moving. Thank you. Perfect. So for those that are unaware, a performance partnership grant is a big grant that has many other grants within it. So for example, if you are currently applying for and receiving GAP funding and tribal response program / brownfield funding in 2 separate grants, you do have the option to combine those into one grant, which has a lot of administrative flexibilities there, and that I'll get to in a minute. But there are about 19 programs that are eligible to be put into a PPG. A lot of tribes that I work with currently do this, but a lot of tribes in Alaska actually don't do it for many different reasons, but we're here to kind of help ease that process if you're interested in going about it. So of the many flexibilities and benefits of a PPG, you have, like I said, one application. You can do one work plan and budget. You can do separate work plans and budgets. But at the end of the day, one FFR, or federal financial report, to submit at the end of your annual report. You have one closeout to do instead of 2 or 4 or 6. You also are able to move funds around within your PPG from different grant programs. So like I said before, let's pretend like you have a GAP grant and a tribal response program grant. With a PPG, if you put them both into this one grant, then you could use GAP funding to further your TRP goals, which is a really nice flexibility. You can even use PPG funding for grant programs that are not in the PPG that are eligible for PPG funds, which is complicated sounding, but in practice, it works well. So if you're interested in wetland work and you have a PPG, you can do wetland work within a PPG if you have GAP and response program, as long as you get the necessary approvals. And when you put grant funds into a PPG, like I kind of mentioned, they lose their tie into each individual program, so you can do with it what you wish. And most importantly to many tribes is that when you have a PPG, you no longer have to do matching funds for a lot of those programs. So brownfields, tribal response, that program usually has a match requirement. Within a PPG, there's a match waiver from 2022 that eliminated the need to do that. So that is like a quick and dirty version of PPGs. The point of this is just to kind of wet your whistle. So if you have any questions, please find me, Lucas. Happy to talk about it more. We also have Chris Correa in the crowd, Claudia Bush, Michael Ortiz, and Susan Combier is online. So talk to any of us about PPGs. We're happy to talk to you about it more if you're interested. Thanks. Todd. Oh yeah, next up. Yeah, you got one, right? Just one slide. You're easy, you're good.
Okay, woo. Everybody awake? My name is Todd Mitchell, Western Washington RTOC rep and environmental director at the Swinomish Tribe in Western Washington. So I like Catherine's take on this. I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions and see where people are at. Let me pull this off of here. So, so raise your hand if you have a GAP grant. Keep it up if you had a GAP grant for more than 5 years. Keep it up if you had it for more than 10 years. Keep it up if you had it for more than 20 years. Keep it up if you had it for 30 years-ish. A few. So the GAP program has been around about that long. So I was just talking with our consortium, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. They were one of the early consortiums asking EPA for GAP grants to help tribes. So a lot of Western Washington tribes are in that bin of 30 years or so, because we were right there at the beginning. So, let's see, what do we have on here? Well, we already talked about PPGs, right? So let's see, multi-year GAP applications. So how many apply for 1 year at a time? Put your hand up if you apply 1 year at a time. 2 years at a time. More than 2 years, 4 years at a time. All right. So that's definitely one of the ways to think about things because, let's see, what else can I think of? Let's see. So put your hand up of GAP provides all the money you need to do your environmental programs. Right? So think about a multi-year application where you kind of have your general capacity building activities and tweak them every year. So we usually put together 2-year applications, but basically two-year applications because we have ours in our PPG, which is a 4-year PPG. So we kind of think of that as like we have an activity for, technical capacity building. So we kind of think of that as like, okay, how much can we get done each year over a 4-year period? So we can kind of break it down over 4 years because we can't get it done in 1 year. That's for sure. So that's definitely one way to think about it is like kind of have your general capacity building activities and like how can you get them done, over a 2-year period, over a 4-year period. So you can kind of break them up. And that kind of goes along with the next one, right? To think about how can you use those multi-year capacity building things to leverage for other grants. So how can GAP program help support water quality or 319 so we can go for other competitive grants. So we've done that in the past where it's like, oh, we're going to study something in a way that helps us get enough information to be hopefully competitive for a 319 restoration grant. But I also think about things too of like, how much money does these other leverage things bring in, or how much do they fund? Because we're all strapped for time, we're all strapped for administrative capacity. So how easy is it to apply for that other grant that you're leveraging? How easy is it to administer it? Because we've definitely thought of that over the years of like, how much time does it take us to do that work? And what is kind of a bottom level funding amount that we'll apply for if it's above that, or not apply for it if it's below that because of the administrative burden. So this definitely kind of creeped up over the years as we've trying to do more work, try to do capacity building, but still have deficiencies in some of our administrative capacity. So I don't know. There's all my things. So yeah, he's right there. Is money worth the work? So, a $50,000 grant could be good, could be helpful, but then you're burdened with the administrative reporting and financials. $100,000 probably worth it because you get more done. But yeah, 100,000, 150,000, will fund, as we know, about one person. So that one person good, and can you sustain it? So those are the things we thought of how to use these things and blend them together to try and get more done. So with that, do we have anything else?
We have a few minutes for questions. If anybody in the room has a question on something they heard. We're gonna run and need a mic.
Hi, guys. Thanks for your presentation. Ray Paddock with Clinton and Haida and RTOC. Chrissy, this is kind of a question for you. Some of the programs you mentioned and what you're saying about tribes being able to help provide administrative capacity. Essentially, that's just almost, if you remember, if you were back in the day, does anyone remember the peer assistance program, or also known as the circuit rider program? Few people. Well, just to give you a heads up on that, that's essentially like what Christy was saying. So, but you would be able to write out into your GAP grant if you were a peer assistance provider to be able to provide that technical assistance to the other tribes. So essentially, you were getting your answers or your questions answered by somebody within your realm, somebody who knows, and they can help guide you. That's something I'm wanting to see back again, but maybe in the form of co-stewardship. And I know that co-stewardship is something that we're looking at tribes and other government agencies, and we're not seeing it at the EPA yet, but I think that there's definitely room for that to essentially happen. Build out all these great environmental staff workers who have the knowledge and be able to provide that information. I mean, it's not to talk down on any of the tribal coordinators in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, but there's a lot of displacement. Let's just say, for instance, like Russ's GAP grant, his project officer is in Alaska. I think there's some disparities there that doesn't allow for the tribal coordinators to really get an understanding of the land, the people that live there and the people that work there. And I know would it be fair to say that you guys as tribal coordinators are overworked, overwhelmed? Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And this, again, and it makes it hard for you guys to be able to do your job properly when you guys can't always reach out to those tribes when they have questions. That comes back to the experts that can and essentially work collaboratively with the EPA. So I'm hoping that at some point we can see what real co-stewardship looks like with the EPA. That's kind of where I just wanted to go with that. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate that. Absolutely. It was basically that relationship was modeled off of previous peer support. And that's not something that just disappears when EPA doesn't have a fancy program for it. And so if you find yourself in those situations, reach out to your tribal coordinator. If your particular tribal coordinator isn't familiar with those arrangements, there's somebody on staff that can help.
Anybody else have a question? Bill?
Thank you. I just saw in the presentation that there was 19 EPA, maybe EPA tribal programs or just 19 EPA program. That number is huge. I didn't have any idea that there was 19 different opportunities for tribes.
Yeah, so thanks for asking a follow-up on that too. There are 19 PPG eligible funding programs that EPA has, and we are looking to see that number go up because unfortunately a lot of the recent BIL and ARP funding programs are not eligible for a PPG, and that all comes down to the statute. But there are 19 eligible programs. Would have been boring to list them all, so why don't you come talk to me if you're curious? Cool. And while I have the mic, actually, I missed my shot with all the fun Q&As. How many of you work for tribes that have a PPG? How many of you do not have PPGs but are interested in them? Awesome. Please come find us. We're happy to talk about it more. Thanks.
Yeah, there. This question is building off Bill's question regarding PPGs. So for you, Lucas, I'm curious what the 19 programs are. Probably can talk offline about that. But also, I've heard in the past that if you have a PPG, there, for example, TRP, IGAP, that you still need to report to each individual program's project officer and have different reportings. Is that accurate?
Not really. Yeah, it's kind of tricky, right? So in a PPG, you have one report that's due quarterly, semi-annual. It can be done as one report. As a PPG project officer, when I get that report, say that it involves GAP, Clean Air Act 105, and Clean Water Act 106, I forward it along to the technical leads that work on the other program so that they can see it and review it. But it's really just one report. It does have to cover everything within the PPG, but the extent to which you break it out into multiple reports or just do it all in one larger report based on the work plans, there's a lot of flexibility there. Does that kind of clarify?
Yes, for the reports. What about approvals?
Approvals.
So, approvals, like if I have a gap in a TRP and I have a question regarding my TRP work plan, but I need an approval, do I get approval from you as the PPG project officer, or do I need specific program approvals from the different programs?
Yeah, great questions. So that's a really good point that I didn't really hit on when I went through my slides really quickly. When there is a PPG, you have a project officer who is the name that you would contact for things like moving funds around. They are the ones who you negotiate the work plan and budget with, but you also have EPA kind of technical leads for each one of the programs in the PPG. So if you have 3 programs in the PPG, let's say you have a water, an air, and a GAP, then you will actually work with someone on our team and the water division on the water program to negotiate that work plan and budget. question about like moving funds around, for example, stuff like that, getting approvals. It does go to me, but then I include and involve the other technical leads that work on the grant with me as we see fit. If it's a really small thing, sometimes it's easy enough just to do and move some funds around. But if it's actually changing the scope of the work plan significantly, then I will help loop in the other program leads. And I typically take that upon myself to reach out to them. You wouldn't have to do it in that case, but it can be a larger conversation if it's a lot of money moving between programs. I think that's all the time we've got.
Wait, we got time for one more question, I think. Anyone has one? You want one?
This isn't good.
So I'll flip the script a little bit. So some of you might be tracking the title of the slide is administrative efficiencies. Some of you might have tracked out of the White House Tribal Nations Summit. There was an executive order that came out, and part of that order is to reduce administrative burdens to access federal grant resources. So I'll just say there's a lot of work going on in the background. Some of those administrative requirements for grants come from federal regulation, some come from policy. So there's a lot of conversation right now about what can we control now? What do we have to go back to Congress to ask them to, change the statutes themselves? And every federal agency sort of that does grant work is asking themselves those questions. So I want to make a pitch to you to get to your tribal coordinators, and I'm happy to pass the mic if you instantly have this, is what, to the extent that we can control it, what is the thing that makes accessing GAP specifically is what I'm tracking, and this group is tracking, hard, right? Is it the reporting side? I just heard someone talking about that. Is it the application side? Is it the management of the dollars inside of PPGs in terms of budgets change and so forth? So if you guys have instant feedback, happy to hand the mic over, but I would just encourage you to get that information to your tribal coordinator to get it to me so I can feed that up, because this is a window where the president of the United States has said, go figure this out. You have, a year to come back with answers. And our ears are wide open right now, and we've got that kind of top-down support for change. So if anyone has comments, I'm happy to pass the mic. I just want to make sure folks are aware. Oh, Ray looks like he's eager to say something. 638, funny. Yep. I will say there are versions of that being explored. We can't do it wholesale because we don't have the same authority. But some of the geographic programs have done just that.
I'm sorry, our next speaker is online, so I don't want to hold them up, but I appreciate, no, thank you. And please do speak to your folks in your area so that you can do that. Let's please give a round of applause for the panel.